The words slipped from her lips so casually, as if she were telling me what she'd eaten for lunch. My granddaughter sat cross-legged on the living room rug, her dolls scattered around her, her voice sweet and unguarded. But what she said made my blood run cold. Children don't invent things like this, not with the detail she gave, not with the quiet certainty in her eyes. I froze, my teacup trembling in my hand, my heart pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it. For a moment, the world outside the window, the birds, the cars passing, the laughter of children playing, kept moving as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. I wanted to believe she was mistaken, that her words were only the imagination of a child. But the truth in her tone left no room for doubt. What she told me was not just a family problem, it was something darker, something dangerous. And it pointed straight at my daughter-in-law, the woman I had trusted with both my son's happiness and my granddaughter's safety. I felt the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing on me. Do I confront her? Do I tell my son? Or do I do the unthinkable, call the police on my own family? In the end, I knew there was no choice at all. Because when a child whispers a truth that shatters the walls of silence, a grandmother has only one duty: to protect, even if it means tearing her family apart. And that was the moment I picked up the phone. Before that afternoon, life in our household seemed almost ordinary, ordinary enough that the secret my granddaughter revealed felt impossible. We lived close, our homes just a few blocks apart, and I often watched over the little one while her parents were busy. To the outside world, we were the picture of a strong family. My son, hardworking and reliable, had built a stable life for them. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was admired for her charm, her elegance, the way she seemed to manage everything with effortless grace. And then there was my granddaughter, bright as sunshine, the joy that knit us all together. I adored that child. From the moment she could walk, she would run into my arms with unfiltered love, chattering about her day, her friends, her little discoveries. I became her confidant, the safe harbor where she could say anything. That bond was precious to me, a reminder of when my own children were small, and of how trust between generations is built not on rules, but on love. Still, I could never ignore the shadows. My daughter-in-law carried herself with the polish of someone who knew the world was watching. She dressed perfectly, spoke perfectly, and never let a single strand of her reputation fall out of place. But beneath that composure, there was a hardness I couldn't quite name. Her smile never reached her eyes, and her patience with her daughter seemed to wear thinner with each passing year. I told myself it was stress, the pressure of keeping up appearances. I wanted to believe that. My son defended her whenever I raised the smallest concern. "She's tired, Mom. She does so much for us." I let it go because I wanted to trust him too. Families survive on trust, or so I thought. Looking back, the signs were there. The silences. The small hesitations. The way my granddaughter sometimes clung to me a little longer before going home. But I didn't see the truth then. I couldn't. It would take her innocent voice, her simple words, to pull the curtain back on everything we thought we knew. Even before my granddaughter's confession, there were moments that unsettled me, small flashes of unease I tried to brush aside. A child's truth often arrives long after the signs, and I now realized those signs were everywhere. I began to notice how my daughter-in-law's temper would spark at the smallest misstep. A dropped cup, a stain on a dress, a question asked at the wrong time, each became a spark that lit her anger. In public, she masked it well, scolding softly with a smile that fooled everyone. But in private, her voice carried a sharpness that made even me step back. My granddaughter's little shoulders would stiffen, her laughter cutting off mid-note, her eyes darting toward me as though begging me to intervene. I told myself not to interfere, that children are resilient, that mothers have their ways. But each time, a seed of doubt planted itself deeper in my heart. There were other things too. Times when my granddaughter mentioned she hadn't eaten dinner, though the table at their house gleamed with untouched dishes when I visited the next morning. Times when she showed up with bruises her mother explained away with vague stories of falls and accidents. I wanted to believe those explanations, but the patterns whispered otherwise. At night, I wrestled with myself. Was I imagining things? Was I being too critical, too protective, too unwilling to trust the woman my son had chosen? He seemed so sure of her, so blind to the tension that grew in their home. And perhaps he needed to be blind. Perhaps it was easier for him to keep faith than to face the truth. Still, doubt not at me. I had spent years raising children of my own, and I knew the difference between clumsiness and cruelty, between stress and coldness. The little girl's smiles grew more guarded, her words careful. And though I tried to silence my instincts, one thought kept returning, pressing heavier with each passing day. Something was wrong in that house. I told myself I needed proof before I could speak, before I could act. I had no idea that proof would come in the most unexpected way, from the lips of the child herself, in words so simple, so devastating, that they left me no room for denial. In the quiet of my own home, when the bustle of the day was over and only silence remained, I found myself reflecting on the choices I had made as a mother. Raising children had never been easy. There were long nights, worries about money, illnesses, and arguments. But I had always believed in one guiding truth: children need tenderness as much as they need discipline. A home without warmth, no matter how orderly, can leave scars deeper than any wound. I compared those memories to what I now saw in my daughter-in-law. Her household looked perfect from the outside, dinners served on time, clothes neatly pressed, a smile ready for every guest. But behind those polished appearances, I saw a hollowness. There was no laughter spilling from their home, no silly songs sung in the kitchen, no gentle words of comfort after tears. My granddaughter seemed to walk on tiptoe in her own house, careful not to disturb the silence her mother demanded. I remembered how my own children once tested me, how they broke rules or spoke out of turn. I had lost my temper at times, yes, but afterwards I had always drawn them close, showing them that mistakes did not mean they were unloved. Watching my granddaughter shrink from her mother's voice, I realized she was not learning that lesson. She was learning something colder, that love was conditional, that safety could vanish with one wrong step. That thought haunted me. It made me question whether I had failed my son somehow. Had I taught him to ignore what was in front of him? Had my silence, my willingness to give his wife the benefit of the doubt, become a kind of betrayal of the little girl who trusted me most? Each reflection tightened the knot in my chest. I wanted to believe things would right themselves, that my doubts were only the product of worry. But as the days passed, I began to understand that this was no longer about my fears or my judgment. It was about a child whose eyes told me, wordlessly, that something was terribly wrong. The signs began to multiply, slipping through the cracks of my daughter-in-law's carefully constructed image. They were small at first, almost easy to dismiss, until I saw them gather into a pattern I could no longer ignore. One evening, when my granddaughter was playing with her dolls at my house, I overheard her whispering to them in a tone too old for her years. "Don't cry. Just be quiet or she'll get angry." The words pierced me. They weren't the innocent mimicry of a child playing house. They were rehearsed from lived experience. My stomach twisted as I realized she was teaching her dolls the lessons she had been taught in silence. Another time, she came to me with a faint bruise along her arm. When I asked what had happened, she hesitated, then said she had fallen off the couch. But her eyes slid to the floor as she spoke, and I recognized that look. It was the look of a child who had been warned not to tell the truth. Meals became another clue. She often arrived at my house hungry, devouring whatever I put before her with an eagerness that made me ache. "Didn't you eat at home?" I would ask gently. Sometimes she said no, other times she shrugged, but her silence spoke louder than her words. A child should never have to wonder if food is a certainty. There were whispers in the community too. A neighbor mentioned hearing shouting late at night, voices sharp and frantic, followed by silence so deep it unsettled them. I brushed it off in the moment, but the seed of worry grew inside me. The final crack came during a family dinner. My granddaughter spilled a bit of water, and though it was nothing more than a small accident, my daughter-in-law's reaction was swift and chilling. Her smile froze, her grip tightened on the child's arm, and her voice dropped to a whisper so sharp it could cut glass. "Do that again, and you'll regret it." Everyone else at the table carried on as though they hadn't noticed. But I had. I saw the fear flicker in the girl's eyes, and I knew then that something was deeply wrong. Piece by piece, the mask was slipping. The cracks in their picture-perfect family were widening, and through them I glimpsed a truth too dark to deny. I just didn't know yet how far it went, or how soon my granddaughter herself would open the floodgates of revelation. It happened on an afternoon that seemed no different from any other. My granddaughter sat cross-legged on the rug in my living room, her dolls lying neatly in a row, her small hands busy with their dresses. She was unusually quiet, her brows furrowed as if she carried a thought too heavy for her age. I poured her a glass of juice and asked if something was on her mind. That was when she looked up at me with eyes that held no playfulness, only solemn truth. "Grandma," she whispered, glancing toward the door as though afraid her mother might appear. "Mommy says I can't tell anyone, but I don't want to keep it anymore." My heart skipped. I knelt beside her, my voice steady even though my chest tightened. "You can tell me anything, sweetheart. I'll listen." The words spilled from her lips in fragments at first, halting, trembling, but with each one the picture sharpened. She told me about the nights when her mother locked her in her room without dinner. About the times when anger became more than words, when her small body bore the marks of hands too harsh. About the threats whispered in her ear, that if she ever spoke, something terrible would happen to her, or worse, to me. Her little hands shook as she spoke, her eyes brimming with tears she tried to hide. I gathered her close, my throat burning with rage and sorrow. Children do not invent such things. They do not carry that kind of fear unless it has been taught to them. In that moment, there was no longer any doubt, no more room for excuses or hesitation. The secret had been spoken aloud, and with it came a clarity sharper than any blade. My daughter-in-law's mask had slipped completely, and what lay beneath was dangerous. I held my granddaughter tighter and whispered the only promise I could make: "You're safe now." Even as I said it, I knew what I had to do next. The truth she had carried to me was too heavy, too urgent. It was not just a family matter, it was something that demanded the voice of the law. And for her sake, I would not stay silent. After she fell asleep on my couch, her small body curled tightly as though even in dreams she braced for harm, I sat in the dim light of the living room, staring at the phone on the table. The weight of her words clung to me, heavy as stone. I had prayed for years that my doubts were unfounded, that I was only imagining the tension I felt in that house. But now, with the truth spoken aloud, I could no longer pretend. The question before me was no longer if something was wrong. It was what I would do about it. The idea of calling the police felt like betrayal, not only of my daughter-in-law, but of my son. How could I drag their family name through investigation and scandal? How could I shatter the illusion of stability he clung to so tightly? But then I looked at the faint bruise on my granddaughter's arm, the one she had tried so hard to hide, and the conflict inside me shifted. Was it betrayal, or was it protection? I considered confronting my daughter-in-law directly, demanding answers, threatening exposure. But I knew her well enough to understand that confrontation would only push her deeper into denial or worse, retaliation. My granddaughter had trusted me with her secret because she believed I could keep her safe. Confrontation would put that fragile trust at risk. Tears blurred my vision as I thought of my son. Would he hate me for what I was about to do? Would he blame me for tearing his family apart? I wanted to believe he would understand, that he would choose his daughter's safety over his wife's facade. But even if he didn't, I knew the choice had already been made for me. The moment my granddaughter whispered her truth, silence was no longer an option. I picked up the phone once, twice, and set it down again. My hands shook, my chest heavy with dread. The thought of uniformed officers knocking at their door, of neighbors watching from their windows, of whispers spreading through the community, it all terrified me. But not as much as the thought of my granddaughter suffering another night in silence. Finally, with a breath that felt like tearing, I dialed the number. Each ring in my ear sounded like judgment, like the world holding its breath for my decision. When the voice on the other end answered, calm and professional, I forced my own voice steady. I told them everything. I spoke of the bruises, the hunger, the threats whispered in the dark. I gave my granddaughter's words the weight they deserved. When I hung up, I sat in the silence, my hands pressed to my face, trembling. The call had been made. There would be no turning back. The police would come, questions would be asked, truths would be dragged into the light whether we were ready or not. I went to my granddaughter's side and smoothed her hair as she slept. "It's done," I whispered, though she could not hear me. "You're safe now." For the first time in years, I felt the sharp edge of fear soften, replaced by something steadier, stronger. I had done the unthinkable. I had chosen truth over silence. And in that choice, I had chosen her. The police came sooner than I expected. Their knock at the door was firm, steady, the sound of reality arriving. My granddaughter stirred, but did not wake as I opened the door to let them in. Their uniforms seemed to bring the weight of the world with them, and for a moment I feared I had made a mistake. But then I looked back at her small frame curled on the couch, and I remembered why I had called. They listened carefully as I repeated what she had told me, their pens scratching across notepads, their faces a mixture of practiced calm and quiet concern. When they asked if she was safe to speak with them, I nodded, though my heart clenched at the thought of her repeating those painful words. She woke groggily, clinging to me as the officers knelt to her level, their voices gentle. To my relief, she told them the same story she had told me, her voice trembling but sure. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. By the time they left, promising swift action, I knew there would be no hiding this. My son returned home later that night to a storm he hadn't expected. He looked at me with confusion, then horror, as I explained what had happened. His face went pale, his denial immediate. No, she wouldn't, she couldn't. But the officer's presence, the seriousness of their questions, left little room for denial. The truth was not something he could sweep aside anymore. News traveled quickly in our community. Neighbors who had once whispered rumors now stood in stunned silence, their curiosity sharpened into judgment. Some offered me quiet words of support. Others looked at me as though I had betrayed the family by going to the authorities. But I knew where my loyalty lay, with the child who had trusted me. As the hours passed, I sat with my granddaughter in my lap, holding her close while the world outside shifted. The house across town that once seemed so perfectly kept now stood under the shadow of suspicion. The mask my daughter-in-law wore so carefully had cracked, and behind it was a truth no one could ignore. The first steps had been taken. Justice was coming, even if it shattered us all. The days that followed were a blur of questions, investigations, and painful revelations. The police returned, this time not just to listen but to act. My daughter-in-law was taken into custody for questioning, her polished appearance stripped away as officers led her past neighbors who stared in stunned silence. The whispers that had once been idle gossip now sharpened into certainty. Something terrible had been hidden behind those immaculate walls. My son was caught between rage and disbelief. At first, he clung to denial, insisting there must be a mistake, that his wife was misunderstood. But as more evidence surfaced, the testimony of his own daughter, the bruises no one could ignore, the statements from neighbors who had heard too many arguments in the night, his defenses crumbled. I saw the moment his face broke, the moment he realized the truth was undeniable. His silence was different then, not protective, but hollow, the sound of a man grieving a life he thought was real. For my granddaughter, the process was gentler. Social workers spoke with her in soft tones, ensuring she knew she was safe, that she was believed. Each time she returned to me, I saw a little more light in her eyes, though the scars of fear would take longer to fade. She clung to me often, and I held her with the quiet fierceness of a promise. She would never have to face that darkness again. The community shifted too. Some who once judged me for involving the authorities now thanked me in hushed tones, ashamed they had looked away for so long. Others avoided my gaze entirely, uncomfortable with the reminder that evil can hide behind perfect curtains. But their opinions mattered little. What mattered was that the truth had been brought into the open, and justice was moving forward. My daughter-in-law's mask had fallen for good, her reputation shattered. And though the pain of betrayal lingered in my son's eyes, even he began to see that protecting his child was the only path left. Justice was not a single moment of punishment, it was the slow, steady work of rebuilding a life from the ruins of lies. And with every passing day, we took one more step away from silence and towards safety. Weeks later, when the dust of investigations and courtrooms had begun to settle, I found myself sitting on the porch with my granddaughter nestled against me. The evening sun dipped low, washing the world in gold, and for the first time in a long while, she laughed without hesitation. It was a sound I had missed more than I realized, a sound that told me healing had begun. The road ahead would not be easy. My son still struggled, torn between grief for the life he thought he had and the new reality he could not escape. But each day, I watched him lean more fully into his role as a father, learning that love meant more than loyalty to a partner, it meant protection, even when it hurt. His eyes softened when he looked at his daughter now, and though sorrow lingered, I saw determination growing too. As for me, I carried the weight of my choice with quiet certainty. Calling the police had felt like betrayal in the moment, but now I knew it was the deepest act of love I could have offered. Silence would have been easier, less scandalous, but silence would have left my granddaughter in danger. Breaking it had cost us dearly, but it had also saved her. The neighborhood still whispered, as neighborhoods always do, but their words no longer mattered. The only voices that mattered were the ones on this porch, the soft chatter of a child finding her joy again, and my own steady voice reminding her that she was safe, loved, and free. As the first stars blinked in the sky, I held her close and whispered a promise only she and I would ever fully understand. The cycle ends here. And in that moment, beneath the quiet glow of the evening, I felt peace. Because sometimes the bravest thing a grandmother can do is to choose truth over silence, no matter the cost.